Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM, Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, a Medical Monday conversation about youth and mental health. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. The numbers are eye-popping, with far too many young people feeling isolated, believing they must navigate the tough waters of mental health challenges alone. Now, we're breaking down the barriers and stigma to promote open conversations and provide resources for youth. My guest is Dr. Angela Glimp, psychologist and CEO of Peer Health Exchange, a national nonprofit working to build healthier communities with young people. Dr. Glimp, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Fisher. So
Sure.
glad to be here.
Let me share just a few fast facts. We have about 20% or 1 in 5 of youth experiencing some form of mental health disorder, and half of all mental health conditions begin at around 14 years old. Depression is one of the top causes of disability among youth aged 10 to 19. And as we know, suicide is the second leading cause of death
Mhm.
among youth 10 to 14, and third leading cause of death among those 15 to 24. Stigma and lack of access often mean young people don't receive the mental health support they so desperately need. You are obviously familiar with these numbers. They're still, quite frankly, scary for a lot of us. But let's talk about who we're talking about, the people behind these numbers. Many of our young people are suffering in silence, as these numbers suggest, and something has to happen before things get worse.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Thank you for sharing those statistics. And you're right. They are very concerning because what that means for folks that if you are caring for a young person, if you are educating a young person, that means one of every five young people that you encounter are struggling. And as you pointed out, are struggling in silence. 5 years ago, when we all were experiencing an unprecedented global pandemic, our Surgeon General at the time really put a highlight and underscored that we're in a youth mental health crisis at that time, and the belief was that once the world opened up and young people weren't subjected to the social isolation that we all had experienced, that things would get better. And unfortunately, that is not the trend that we are seeing. In fact, we are actually seeing, if we break down those statistics, Mr. Fisher, and look at young people who hold marginalized identities, meaning our young people of color, young people who identify as LGBTQ plus, we are actually seeing higher rates of suicide ideation, depression, anxiety among those young people. And in addition, despite the resurgence of digital mental health services and resources that are made available, there's still a gap in access, meaning that those young people are still not finding or utilizing those resources in the ways that they probably need and want to. So it is very disheartening when I continue to hear those statistics. In some instances, see that they're growing for young people, and it's just so important that we, one, make sure that the mental health education is there to help inform, but also to your point, to combat the stigma that we know is a barrier for young people accessing the mental health treatment. And in addition to that, I think it's very important that we educate those adults who are in care for, those trusted adults that young people actually tell me that they want to be around them to support their mental health journeys, that we're also providing resources and education to those folks as well.
Talk to me a little bit about Peer Health Exchange. What work are you doing in this space, or trying to do?
Yes, so Peer Health Exchange is a national nonprofit organization. And really, what we are about is addressing health equity. And we do that in a couple of ways. One is we listen. So we're about young people. Everything that you see, hear, feel, and touch that's coming from Pure Health Exchange really is centering what young people say they want and they need. And what they tell us and what they told us for the past 25 years is that they want the tools and resources that they need to make healthy decisions. And we do that through peer education. So, training young people to actually teach mental health education in high schools across the country. And we're also reaching young people digitally because we know if young people are not in school, where they spend a lot of their time, they're also online. And so it's very important that we reach them there with the education and tools and resources that they need to make healthy decisions for themselves.
Okay, let's drill down a little bit so that I'm sure that I'm understanding and our listeners are understanding. Is this training for peer-to-peer assistance, or are these the young people who are training to help other young people? Are they older? Break that down for me, please.
So it's actually both. So our legacy work was that we would have slightly older peers to high school students, so meaning college age, so that 18 to 24-year-old young people who our organization trains to then go into high schools and teach mostly ninth graders. And then more recently, I would say in the past 3 to 4 years, we also realized that, sometimes high school students themselves, slightly older high school students, are also best positioned to reach their slightly younger peers. So we actually have trained 11th and 12th graders to actually provide and teach these health education workshops to ninth graders in their own high schools. And I think the peer education, I mean, we've known this, research has shown this for decades, that it is very impactful no matter what the age group. One, because people just feel more secure and comfortable, and they feel like folks their age or have shared experience just can relate to their experience. Secondly, I would say that because young people, if they're in school, as I mentioned, they spend a lot of their days in school, it usually is their peer that is their sort of first encounter or a peer that will recognize, right, when another young person is in crisis or distress. So it is important to us not only to get the education or to promote that peer education, but also empower other young people to be able to recognize, respond, and really be a first responder to a young person that might need some mental health support.
What does that training look like? What do you tell these peer counselors? Obviously, you have a doctorate in psychology. You're a psychologist. But
Mhm.
18, 19, 20-year olds are not. And
Correct.
so what can you tell them that is helpful, and getting them to also understand the responsibility that comes with trying to address these issues? The thing that I guess comes to mind for me,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if this is an accurate analogy, but it's almost kind of like we've seen in underserved communities where you have uh, disruptors who,
Mhm.
people who have been in the criminal justice system or are operating, uh, outside, social norms, and then
Mhm.
they have matured, they have grown up, and they understand, and so they are trying to interrupt to make a community safer. Is that a similar analogy, or am I off there?
No, I think there are aspects of that that definitely translates to our approach. I do want to make a really clear distinction. What we're training our peer educators to do is to educate and not counsel. So really
Aha.
what they yes, so that's a very important distinction to make. And so what that really looks like is a couple of things. One is what young people really need, and especially young people who are from communities of color or live in or attend schools in community underserved communities, the biggest barrier is stigma. And so, one thing that we do, or our approach, is to really help destigmatize mental health or mental illness. And so, part of the training really focuses on that, really educating when we talk about mental health. What is that? It's not just about mental disorders or mental illnesses. Just like physical health, there's a continuum. So, we're talking about wellness to illness, right? And so, really expanding young people's understanding of what mental health is, and then also to normalize, or to what we do in our training is really to debunk myths about mental health as a way to combat stigma. The second biggest piece is that, to your point, what are the resources that are available for me as a young person, whether they're right in the school building, if they're digital, online, like how do you then navigate? Because there's so much information that young people are exposed to. So how do I know that there's a resource that's valid and reliable?
Right.
So part of that training through their peers is to help educate them on what is available to me. How do I know it's valid? Where do I go to access that? And then the third piece is around crisis. And I know that when we talk about mental health, a lot of people go to that, right? The illness, the disorder. And so part of that training, and we do offer a mental health first aid training to those peers. How do you recognize the warning signs that you or your peer, are experiencing a mental health crisis or distress? And then how then do you activate or respond in a way that that person, yourself or a loved one or a friend or a peer, can get the help that they need? So that is really sort of our education and our approach that we take. Not that they're counselors, but that they're educators.
This is fascinating to me. So give me an example of something that would be taught to these peer educators. Um,
Mhm.
Share that with me.
Yeah, so I think one example, like I said, with mental health, it really is expanding young people's understanding of what that all entails. And what I find fascinating, like when I go in the classroom and observe these young people, you see these light bulbs, these ahas, like, oh, it can just be about me, how better ways that I can manage my emotions. Oh, I didn't realize that that was a part of my mental well being. Yes. Or, oh, there are things that I can do to address anxieties that are already in my wheelhouse. I didn't realize that those were tools that I already have access to that can support just my normal well being. Or we don't say that you're crazy, right? So some of those trigger words that really, really uh, pours fuel on the stigma. So really thinking about accessible and inclusive language around mental health is a big part of what we do. But also the resources, the access. I cannot underscore that enough. That there are young people that come to us and they just don't know what's available. So it could be as simple as, Mr. Fisher, your high school has a school based health center. There are professionals in your school building. You can access this for free. It's right here. So, again, it's also breaking those types of barriers. Like, what is available to me? 988, the difference between 988, which is a crisis text
Mhm.
line for yourself or anyone, loved ones, family members, friends that are experiencing a crisis. We should be calling 988 versus 911.
Right.
Why? Because
Yeah.
988 has, to your point about skilled, trained professionals who can deal with crisis. And so, even just unlocking that education are the types of things that we do with young people.
What is the website for those young people who may want to participate, as well as those who may want more information about this? How can they find out more?
Yes. So I would say go to peer, so peer, PEER, healthexchange.org. And on that website, If you are a young person, there is a link for you to say, how do I get involved as a young person? If
Okay,
you're an
hold that
adult,
point. Hold that
sure.
point because I've got to take a really quick break, but we will continue on the other side. This is really interesting, quite fascinating. We want to remind our viewers that you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. We'll be back on Sirius XM Channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about youth mental health. My guest is Dr. Angela Glimp, psychologist and CEO of Peer Health Exchange. So, Dr. Glimp, you were talking about youth getting to these particular resources on Peer Health Exchange. You said .org?
.org, yes.
Okay. So please continue your point.
Yes, and another resource that I also want to point out that actually we have 40,000 young people in the DMV that is actually accessing Pure Health Exchange's mobile app called SelfSee. So self and sea like the ocean, SEA.org. It is a digital resource hub that we created with young people. And what they told us about 4 or 5 years ago, they wanted to be able to go in and find different kinds of resources to support their mental wellness. So we have about 329 resources there for young people to peruse through across various mental health topics. They can go in, they can identify themselves based on identity markers that are important to them or issues within mental health or mental wellness that's important to them. And so they can find those, as well as we have over 100 young people who are our digital storytellers. And I want to underscore the storytelling piece because this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And the theme for this month is in every story, there's strength. And so, really aligned to that theme, young people can go to selfsee.org and they can look at hundreds of videos of young people telling their story about their journeys, their triumphs, their challenges as it pertains to their mental health and other areas of health. So I also encourage that as a resource for young people who are listening today.
When you are talking about educating the peers, how long does it take? What does it involve? What kind of commitment is
Mhm.
involved regarding time?
Yes, that's a great question. So, when we are working directly with peer educators who are teaching their peers in their respective high schools, we partner with schools and we usually have host teachers that we work with, and we work every week with those young people who sign up. And this is a paid opportunity because we also believe that young people hold expertise that we don't have and they should be compensated for them. So this is a paid opportunity. And they, before the program is implemented in their high schools, they spend about 4 to 6 weeks prior to the implementation getting exposed to our curricula, which is aligned to the National Health Education Standards. So this is real curricula that we develop, and they get familiar with it, familiar with the topic areas, and they're trained by us. And then they go in and they teach, and they're also supported. So they also have ongoing trainings every week before every course. They are able to talk through some strategies that they want to use or examples. So they're honestly getting workforce development opportunities. They're learning what their teachers have to do every day to prepare for curricula, but they are also able to get like skills, like public speaking skills, for example, and they are actually able to do good service in their schools by really imparting health information and education to their peers. So it really is a robust program that I think checks a lot of boxes when we're thinking about, what's important. We want healthy students, we want them learning, and we want a safe and inclusive climate and learning environment for them to learn. And I think just seeing that peer-to-peer interaction really does highlight all of those elements in a really powerful way.
Where do these classes take place?
So they're in high schools, and usually what happens, there's like an advisory period so we're not interrupting math or reading like the core academics. Usually there's an advisory period where those courses take place within the school day. So the schools work with us to figure out their schedule and when we can make room for them to have that health education. Another thing, Mr. Fisher, I want to make very important when we talk about access and we talk about health equity, not all young people in this country attend schools where they're getting health education. So that means there are some students that are probably listening right now that may not have a health class or they may not be getting mental health. So we serve to either fill that gap or be a supplement to whatever high schools have. But I think that that's also very important when we talk about mental health, that there are many millions of young people who are not getting any education. So while it's important that we show up for young people in schools, that's why I think it's also important we find other spaces that young people occupy and make sure that we have the resources and education there. That is why our digital work is equally important for us as well.
How are they selected?
How are the schools selected?
Now, how are the individual young people selected to participate? I mean, it's one thing if I were an 18 or 19-year-old listening to this and I decided this is something that I want to do, but certainly there would have to be some kind of screening process to determine whether or not I had the intellectual acumen to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, so for our older peers, I would say that 18 to 24-year-olds, they apply like they're applying for a job at my organization.
I
So they are
see. Mhm.
employees. For the high school students, again, we work in very close partnership with the schools and the host teachers that sort of sponsor us. And we do have, working in collaboration with them, there is a process of sort of all call to students who are interested. And then there's a process that we work with the schools on selecting those young people. And again, once they're selected, we do compensate them. So it is a paid opportunity for those young people as well.
What are you looking for when you're talking about the direct peer-to-peer, those who are in high school? What kind of, is there an it factor that kind of
Mhm.
comes with a young person who when you meet them or talk to them and you say, yes, this is definitely somebody that we can use, as opposed to somebody who is not ready?
Yeah, really the biggest it factor really is interest. So, we recognize that for some of those young people we work with, I mean, it's spanned the gamut of young people who have had experience doing something like this before, um, or they're actively involved in their school community, so they're used to like public speaking. And we've had young people like this is their first ever opportunity public speaking or doing something to this magnitude. So we are equipped, right, to work with young people who come with those varied experiences. But for us, it really is the interest in health and the interest in wanting to make a difference. And if that comes across, then we do our parts to support and to help those young people. So it really just spans the gamut. And then some young people, some of them they say, I think I want to pursue a career in health or medicine, or I want to pursue a career in teaching. And some of them say, oh my goodness, this helped me really solidify that interest. Some young people said, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. No, this is way harder than what I thought. So we are open really to them being exposed and really uncovering. But the most important thing, and I will tell you this because young people, I have the privilege of doing this job and working directly with young people. And I think for listeners out there, there are a lot of myths, especially around teens, right? Like, oh, they are so involved or busy in trying to exert their independence that they're not really, woke in a sense of what's happening around them. These young people understand. They understand the needs of themselves and their peers when it comes to their health. And they want to be a part of that. They just want their voices to be amplified. They want their experiences to be taken seriously. So any outlet that they have to be able to do that, they're going to be interested in that. And that's what we look for.
How do you know it's working?
So we have a number of ways that we assess it. First we get the impact directly from the young people. So when we have a young person that says, I didn't know this resource existed before encountering your program. Now that I know that exists and now that I'm utilizing it and my health is better because of it, that to me is like the ultimate evidence that I need to hear. But we also do, because I have a research background, so we do employ pre-post testing, so assessing those knowledge, skills, and attitudes around mental health before they're exposed to the program, and then after. And of course, we want to see positive movement, and when we do, we take that as success. And then on our digital, our web app, SelfSee, we actually can track, what young people are looking at, what they're utilizing, what services they spend time on. So all of that is useful data to know that they are taking what we're putting out there seriously and that they're finding value in it.
I want to talk to you about some of the issues regarding young people and mental health more broadly. And thank you for sharing all of this. I really,
Absolutely.
I must admit that this is an innovative way to address this, or at least those who may need to be supported if they can get on the ground floor and try to address some of their issues, no matter how big or small they may be, that may impact their mental health in a positive way as they get older, where they may not necessarily need to seek professional services down the road.
Correct.
Yeah. But I do want to ask, we are acutely aware of the impact of the pandemic on everyone, and particularly young people. But we know also that mental health issues for young people didn't start in 2020.
Absolutely.
These things have been going on for a long time. Certainly the pandemic was revealing in
Yes.
so many ways for so many issues, particularly mental health. But I guess my question is, because you did mention the past 25 years, so 20 years prior to the pandemic, as we address or try to look at mental health for young people, what do we know now that we didn't know prior uh, to 2020? Is the reporting better? Are clinicians having an understanding of things that perhaps when you were a kid or when I was a kid, we don't believe we saw?
Yes, that is a really great question. And I'll say here's my view of that. So I definitely share the view that the mental health crisis or mental health challenges was around before 2020 for sure. So I definitely share that view. I think a couple of things come to mind for me. So I graduated from high school in 1997. So I was a kid that was in school in
Oh my
the
goodness.
I know, aging myself, but I just want to, it's important to, in terms of how I
Provide the
think about it.
context. Yes,
Yeah. So
yes,
that means
I graduated in 1981, so we could talk about that
okay.
too.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that means I was in school, if I think about it, from 1984 to 1997. And I cannot recall a time where the word mental health education was used in my own education. So we didn't get it at all. Like we, in the early grades, we probably got things around like, here are the emotions, but talking about definitely not about mental illness. Never addressed any of that anxiety. Words like anxiety. I mean, I have an 8-year-old son and he uses that word a lot. And I didn't know what that was until probably when I was studying psychology and getting the clinical sense of that. So I just wanted to offer that. Like it just wasn't something that was dealt with in education or talked about. So that's one piece of it. And I think over the years, what has happened with research and developments around, sort of if you look at the other end of that continuum around disorders, so there was a lot of understanding, a lot of research around the brain. How does the brain work? Neuroscience. So the emergence of that started to come to play in the 90s. And then it was like, okay, so let's look at the brain at all developmental areas. And then what happened? You started to see fields really coming together. Now we got more insight around what's happening in the brain. How does that manifest clinically? So now you got these neuroscientists and the psychologists working together. And that I think over time helped us to understand better around, mental health and sort of these behaviors, like when they come about. Then now we see social media and just technology. So people are talking about it more and there's more exposure. So I won't say, I was in a parent group and they asked, like, are anxiety levels like, are just more kids anxious than we were? And I really don't know how to answer that. I just think that there's more discussion around it, there's more insight on it, and there's just a preponderance of information that just didn't exist when I was a kid growing up. So I think those are a lot of different confounding factors that makes it hard for us to say one reason. But what I am heartened by is that there is more conversation. Like I am more knowledgeable, and therefore my kid at 8 is definitely more knowledgeable than I was at 8 years old, and that is definitely what we want to see, right? We want to make sure that when we know more, we do better, and that younger people are getting a better shot at really tackling mental health in ways that we didn't because we just didn't have access. So that's what I'm heartened by. And there's still more work to do, right? Because as I mentioned, there are still pockets in this country where these conversations are not happening. Or when, the devastating school shooting in Uvalde happened. And obviously it was very devastating and kids and educators and folks lost their lives. But the statistic that really stuck with me was that there was one mental health professional serving that whole town, not the school, but the whole town. So that means when we talk about access, there are places in this country where that is true. So now this town just went through a traumatic experience, and you're telling me there's one mental health professional that's available. So we still have work to do despite the progress and the developments that we now get to benefit from years of just learning and researching this information.
So you touched on something that was connected to my next question about what we knew then or didn't know then and what we know now. Obviously, school shootings is an extreme example, but it is also unfortunately very common. It just is, and that's a horrible thing. But I guess the thing that I am asking about is, and you talked about when you were in high school, I'll talk about when I was. We could have situations where a young person was nervous about a test,
Mhm.
Okay. Or nervous about first football tryouts, or
Mhm.
nervous about first cheerleading tryouts,
Mhm.
or, I'm just trying to, all of the things that young people, um, that is normal for them to be nervous about. Um, and I guess the concern for a lot of people of a certain age, and they will say, we didn't have that. You were nervous about an exam, or a test, just a test that you get, the pop quiz.
Mhm.
You're nervous about it, and your parents say, well, you need to study, or your peers say, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, you need to study. You're nervous about failing it, so do better.
Right.
If you're nervous about, trying out for, for cheerleading, or the debate team, or football, how do you, I guess the question is, we called it nervous, now they call it anxiety, levels of
Mhm.
anxiety. Are there risks to calling everything anxiety? How do you determine the difference between the two? And if an 8-year-old
Mhm.
is understanding issues about anxiety, as opposed to understanding that life is no crystal stair, and you got to just get up and
Right.
put your big boy pants on, or your big
Mhm.
girl pants on, and get
Mhm.
out there and deal with the world. Where is the balance
That's a really good question and a valid question. And that's why I think it's so important that, education is so key. One of the things that we do, to your point about anxiety, so there's a continuum, just like anything. So if we think about like physical health, you get a pain, they give you a scale and they ask you, is it 0 to 10, right? Maybe that 2, you may not necessarily need medical intervention, but maybe that 10 you do. And it's no different with anxiety. Like anxiety is a real thing. There's normal areas of it, and then there's places where it's debilitating, meaning that now it's interrupting your daily activities, or you can't eat and you can't sleep, and there is where you probably need an intervention. And so that is why it's so important that we get educated about, what is that spectrum, what is that continuum, and when do I need that intervention, and when do I maybe need a different level of support. Maybe I can just take a break and take a walk, and maybe that'll get my head clear, and then I can get back to studying that test. But if it's something like I haven't slept in 2 days, well, then that's a different level. So I think to your point, it's so important, right, that we just educate around these things. But I will say this, and this is where I think early exposure to mental health education is so important. So yes, my 8-year-old, I mean, he uses that term, and Doechii has a song called Anxiety, right? So there is a lot of awareness and normalizing of terms that do have some clinical significance to them, but also have some everyday relevance to them, which is the beauty of what I think is happening. But what he has that I didn't necessarily have, I got that speech too. Like, you just gonna have to study harder or work harder. And what happened, I stayed in school a long time, right? And sometimes that work harder, study harder just didn't pan out. And I didn't know what other supports or resources were available to me. And then that just caused a burnout. And it just caused, a ripple effect of things, because I just didn't understand that, this is normal. And maybe you could have taken some small chunks. Maybe you need to take a run before you tackle this test, right? And so he is actually building up sort of an arsenal, if you will, because it's just more openness and more awareness around just small things that you can do, such that when you do get exposure to that normal life things that cause normal levels of anxiety, you actually have something in your toolkit to help you address it, versus sort of the messages that I think that I got that really just weren't as impactful and effective, because once I got to different levels where there were multiple tests or that dissertation, and that approach just doesn't work, I really didn't have that arsenal built up to help me when I needed it. So that's my response to that. So I think it's just very, very important with terms like anxiety and depression that we be able to distinguish with sort of normal levels and where it's clinical, and how to recognize when it's clinical. And for parents that are listening, or just your own peer group, or if you are raising young people, telltale signs. If you notice that normal behaviors have stopped abruptly, changes in mood, changes in sleep, eating, changes in who your young person's talking to. Like, you notice they were hanging around with this person and now they're not talking to this person anymore. Those are telltale signs that something is happening. Now, I'm not always saying that it means that you need to then, there's something clinically wrong, but there is a big enough change where some level of intervention, and usually as a parent, you are best positioned to sort of be that first responder to say, hey, let's unpack what's happening. What's happening? Let's talk about what's going on in your life right now, and making space to do that. I know there's a lot of concern about young people in this digital age and young people consuming or being on social media too much. And that kind of applies to adults too, right? Especially
Yeah.
parents, who are working parents, and maybe you have demanding jobs where you, like myself, where sometimes you have to be on. So you also have to tell yourself to create those boundaries and those cutoffs so that you can be in tune to, and that you can see, and that you can and really understand what's happening in your young person's life. So that would be my sort of take on that.
Well, I again appreciate your response to all of the questions, and what I would consider a very innovative way to address this a growing issue. And thank you so much for
Thank you.
for sharing with us. We just want to remind you that if you are looking to participate or want more information, you can go to peerhealthexchange.org. Also, selfsea.org. That's SELFSEA.org. Dr. Angela Glimp, thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
your
you for
time.
having me. Thank you so much.
That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, May 12th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.